Oh, good morning, church. I hope everyone's doing good. I hope you're having a great start to your morning today. And I think before I get into the word, if you have a pen and a notebook, I would love for you guys to take notes and get your coffee, get your tea, make yourself comfortable because this is going to be pretty long. I think this week has been really destructive in our political state. And just with the environment around going on in our lives and just with the world, thought today's sermon about the Good Samaritan would be an amazing reminder for all of us. And as believers of Jesus Christ, I feel like this is going to help us. All right, so the Good Samaritan. Why you should know the story of Good Samaritan? Let's start there. And I think you should know the story of the Good Samaritan in the New Testament because it's one of the most recognizable of all of Jesus's parables. Secondly, it guides us on how to live a authentic life. Thirdly, it helps us explain why the terms Good Samaritan is such a part of our culture. Countless charities, hospitals, and ministries are named after this parable. We even have Good Samaritan laws in our legal code, if you believe it or not. Your liability is limited if you're doing your best to help someone in an emergency. So, what is this story? Okay, so let's look into it. The lawyer who tested Jesus, let's start there, right? Jesus tells a story as part of his response to this lawyer's question. A lawyer approaches Jesus, but he wasn't the kind of lawyer you'd think. He was an expert in the Old Testament law and interpreted how they should be applied to our society. Okay, so sounds like people we know in our lives, like the pastors, the priests, just the higher up people who control our society. He was almost like that, right? He was an expert in the Old Testament. He interpreted what the Old Testament is, and he would pretty much tell people how to apply that in their society and period of time. So I like to picture him with a professional, gray beard and a flashy red tunic. We learn later in the story that he cares about how he appears to others, kind of a show off. So fancy clothes and a red, because Luke tells us that he came to test Jesus. Okay, so I want you to highlight that. He came to test Jesus. The word for test is the same word for when the devil came to test and tempt Jesus in the wilderness too. So that's something you should know too. So the scene is confrontational. There is confrontation going on. The lawyer has plenty of reasons to think Jesus is what the kids call these days as suspicious, right? In nearly every page of Luke gospel leading up to this encounter, Jesus had violated Old Testament laws, and I think that boggles my mind. He cured on the Sabbath. He proclaimed forgiveness of sins. He shared table fellowship with sinners, tax collectors, and prostitutes. He let the disciples pick grain on the Sabbath, and he didn't make them follow the prescribed ritual washings, which is crazy to me. And the most curious thing was how he palled around with and cured people outside the faith. So think of Jesus. If we were to bring Jesus in our setting, Jesus would be the one healing people in like a temple outside. Now in a Hindu temple, or he would be healing people at a mosque, or he would be healing people at a bar, he would be healing people at a club, he would be just out here, anywhere but the church, guys, come on. So the lawyer comes to set Jesus straight, right? The lawyer is pissed off, like he's angry, he's frustrated. The lawyer comes to set Jesus straight, and Jesus's followers must have held their breath in anxiety because wondering how this will turn out. So think of this like this lawyer, somebody of power, he's somebody of a status, and he's coming to question Jesus. Eternal life, what is it and how do we get it? The lawyer asks, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He wasn't asking about how to go to heaven, okay? Notice that, because that wasn't a very developed notion until after Jesus' resurrection. So, no, eternal life had to do with the quality of life in this world. So I want you to catch that. How do you have meaning beyond the present moment? How do you live a life that adheres to God, one saturated by grace? In other words, how does one live a good life? Jesus does the rabbi thing by doing something they still teach clergies to do, right? He answers a question with a question. What does the law say and how do you interrupt it? Jesus recognizes that you don't just quote lines from the Bible. You have to figure out a reasonable way to apply them to your life. So Jesus just lobbed him a softball question. Every Jewish kid had this answer memorized by the time they were 5 years old. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and you shall love your neighbors as yourself. Whoa, right? So Jesus says, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. Isn't that crazy, church? Isn't that crazy? So who counts as my neighbor? The crowd exalts, okay? And that was easy, right? Because everyone agrees, let's go eat, but the lawyer hadn't had his like Perry Mason moment yet, and I don't know if you guys get that. But so he sets his trap, and so the lawyer asks Jesus, he's like, who is my neighbor? And so Luke tells us that he asked the question seeking to justify himself. So he wants to show off how good of a neighbor he is. He likely had like stories locked in the chamber of how he helped the next door kid, how he helped a small kid wipe off, boogers coming out of his nose or something, or how he mowed the rabbi's lawn, or how he gave 30 silver coins to some radical fund, To us, it sounds like he lobs a softball question back to Jesus, right? They're playing back and forth right now. Like Jesus and Rabbi are going back and forth. Everyone knew the passage from Leviticus about loving one's neighbor. The context is about taking care of your people, the people who are like you share things in common. So when we think of our neighbors, we think the same. Neighbors are people we share a zip code with, okay? So if anyone shares the same zip code that you share, that means they're your neighbor. Somebody who's a socio-economic demographic and a similar culture and a worldview. So they're your neighbors. The trap the lawyers set was to get Jesus to say that neighbors are like you. Share love with the ones who are like you. Your people, the people that are around you. These are the people you're responsible for, right? And the lawyer was trying to get that answer of Jesus, right? If Jesus had given that kind of answer, the lawyer could have said, then stay inside your circle, Jesus. Don't be messing with the tax collector, sinners, prostitutes, foreigners, and especially the stinking Samaritans. So I hope you're trying to get what the lawyer was trying to do. So he was trying to make Jesus say, yeah, your neighbors are the ones you share a zip code with. The neighbors are the ones that you share the same views with, right? So then the lawyer would tell Jesus, then stop going around and hanging out with the tax collectors, sinners, prostitutes, foreigners, especially the Samaritans. Who can I exclude from neighbor love, right? What the lawyer wanted to know is not who is the neighbor, but who isn't my neighbor. How far out do I have to go to show care to people? So it reminds me of a pastor's friend whose church hosted several ethnic congregations on Sunday morning, right? The church was crawling with people on Sunday mornings from all these congregation meetings in various places on their massive campus. He said that they had ushers come up to him, essentially asked, with all these people scrolling around here on Sunday, it's hard for us to know who might be coming to our worship. How do we know who to be nice to and roll out the red carpet? And so the pastor says, I don't know all of them. Because instead of giving the lawyer the answer, he expected Jesus did another typical rabbi thing, answer a direct question with a story and more questions. So Jesus makes up a story about a man on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho. This road was notorious for people getting mugged along the way. It would be akin to someone opening a story. So a guy was walking down a skid row. This can't turn out well. You're not surprised to learn that he fell amongst many thieves who robbed him. They beat him, they stripped him, they left him for dead. Now the way Jesus tells the story is that we are to see ourselves as the guy in the ditch. Some circumstance that could happen to anyone who lay out there. Your life draining away into a puddle of blood under your head, but there is hope. Along comes a priest, and you think the priest is going to help the man of God, right? This man of God dressed up in his godly robes, majestic headwear, that his duty, but nope, he walks on the other side of the path to avoid him. This is kind of funny because this was a narrow path. This is not like 10 lanes of traffic, right? The priest has to practically step over you and ignore you and walk away. So you can see the tension there. Some commentaries have attributed for the priest that the text doesn't provide. For example, if the priest were on his way to perform his official duties, he couldn't come into contact with the corpse or bleeding person. So he was putting the law above human compassion. But other scholars are quicker to point out that the text never ascribes motives, and the Jewish expectation was that the priest was supposed to give assistance. No question, but he didn't. So maybe he didn't want to get involved. Maybe he thought it could be a trap that I fall into. Maybe he thought guy had it coming, putting himself in danger like that, wandering around in the neighborhood. So maybe he didn't have time, right? After the priest, a Levite comes along, right? And what happens? After the Levite came along, he passed the person, and as you keep reading the story, along comes the third man. Everyone's listening to Jesus, was expecting a third man to be an Israelite, right? Because there were jokes and stories that involved the triad of priests, Levite, Israelites. Just like we'd start a story with a priest, minister, and rabbi walked into a bar, but Jesus didn't follow the typical form of priest, a Levite, and Israelites. He substituted an Israelite for a Samaritan. Okay, so he substitutes a Samaritan for the Israelite. For us, it would be like saying a priest, a minister, and a rabbit walked into a bar. So it was that disconnected for the people. But we know the rabbit, which in this case was a Samaritan in Jesus' story. I'm only here to tell you this because I want you to understand how how out of box this was when Jesus was teaching the story to the lawyer. So not a priest, not a Levite, not an Israelite, okay, but a Samaritan who came to help the man that was in the ditch. Now, to say there was animosity between Jews and Samaritan would be the understatement of the year, because the division were ugly, ancient hatred on both sides, okay. We still see that in our time. When one Jewish person called another Jew a Samaritan, it was the biggest insult you could make. Even our calling the story of the Good Samaritan is actually cringy if it implies, right? There was one good one, not like all the other people, right? So along came the Samaritan and he had compassion for the man. The biblical word for compassion has the same root as a womb, okay? It is something you feel deep inside, evoking caring instincts. Moved by compassion, he goes to extraordinary lengths to save the guy. He bonds his wounds, poured oil and wine on them, put him on his animal, took him to an inn, opened an account with the innkeeper, okay? See the extent the Samaritan is going through. Sometimes there was a room at the inn, okay, and said whatever it takes, however long it takes to get him back on his feet, put this on my account. Then Jesus asked the lawyer, which of these three was a neighbor to the guy in the ditch? The one who showed mercy. And Jesus then says, go and do likewise. Okay, so, and I want you to understand that, I want you to take a second to understand the importance and the heavy weight that this story carries, right? So eternal life involves loving neighbors who might also be your enemy, which is crazy, you guys. The lawyer wanted to know what he had to do to have eternal life, a life worth living, a life that connects you with the eternal one. The answer is love God with your whole self and love your neighbors. But neighbor includes enemies, people in need, people who've made mistakes. Our Christian ethic is rooted in the story. You know, we're so quick to judge, we're so quick to make fun of people, we're so quick to be in cliques, we're so quick to put away people who do not look like us or do not belong, people who do not have good morals, we push them aside. We are people who help, we are people who get involved to improve our neighborhood. We also respond to Jesus' invitation to expand the circle of who we consider our neighbor. Sometimes when we give money to people overseas, people will ask, why should we send our money to help those people when they are hurting people right there? Part of the answer is that we remind ourselves that Jesus challenged us to widen the circle of our care. You know, we know that there's a huge genocide going on in Palestine, right? There's a huge war going on. You know, if somebody came up to you and said, hey, can you send money to help these people get food? What is going to be our response? The challenge here is to widen the circle of our care, church. Our neighbors are those in need anywhere in the world. We are connected to them in God's eye. When God looks at the world, our puny divisions and national boundaries are nothing. It's one world and we are going to sense God. It means to love our neighbors, to help even those who aren't like us, those who do not look like us, those who do not speak the same language. Anyone who is in need is our neighbor, okay? So who is in this ditch today? Who is this person who is hurt today? Who has been passed over and left in the ditches today? Who can we help? I learned that over the past 2 years, there has been a huge spike in the number of senior citizens becoming homeless. And I think you have children who are lost. We see people who cannot afford healthcare systems. So a lot of these things that I would love for our church to take under account. So before I end this word today, church, I want you to take a minute and think about how Jesus had recognized this question and how Jesus had responded to that question. You know, like Jesus could have been Jesus could have just said, yeah, your neighbor is somebody who shares the same zip code or somebody who looks like you. But no, Jesus went above and beyond that. And he challenged the lawyer to widen his circle. And I think that's the same message for us today in 2025, church, and beyond 2025, is that we have to widen our circle, church. We cannot just keep hating on people because they do not have the same religion or they do not have the same morals or they do not look like us or they don't speak like us or they have different way of living life. We cannot hate on people. Our biggest commandment is to love people. Our biggest commandment is to love thy neighbors as you love yourself. And I want you to understand how crazy that is. It was not to go and impose your belief on other people. It was not to correct other people. It was not to judge other people. It was not to make things right. No, it was to love. LOVE, love your neighbors as you love yourself. So I hope that today, if you got anything out of this message, that you would go and widen your circle. See what you can do. See who's in the ditch. See how you can be a good Samaritan to somebody out there, church. And this is my biggest prayer for you, to whoever is listening to this. If you caught anything, that God this week will help you to be a good Samaritan. So say, Jesus, Lord, help me to be a good Samaritan. Help me to be a good Samaritan. Blessings, and I hope you have a great Sunday. We'll see you soon.
జలములలో బడినే వెళ్ళిన నన్నేమి చేయవు నా యేసయ్యా, నీకే వందనం, 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 నీకే